Content warning. This episode discusses domestic violence, emotional abuse, and trauma. Some stories may be difficult to hear. Please take care of yourself while listening. Pause or skip if you need to. If you or someone you know is in danger, call 1-800-799-SAFE or visit thehotline.org. Some bruises fade, others never do. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and this episode is different. It isn't statistics or slogans, it's my story. The parts I hid, the parts I survived, and the parts I'm still healing from. For a long time, I thought abuse would be obvious. I thought it meant screaming or hitting or police reports. I didn't understand that it could sound like, "I love you so much, I can't stand to be without you." That it can look like devotion until it isn't. This isn't a story about weakness. It's about how easy it is to disappear inside someone else's version of love and how hard it is to find your way back out. If any of what you hear tonight feels familiar, remember, you are not crazy, you're not alone, and you are not to blame. This is episode 17, When the Mask Falls, The Bruises You Can't See. I met him when I was vulnerable, lonely, unsure of who I was, looking for something that felt steady, someone who understood who I was. And he saw that, and he definitely used it. That's what people like him do. They study the cracks in you and pour themselves into you until you can't tell where you end and they begin. He came into my life like a storm made of promises. Good morning messages before sunrise, late night calls until I fell asleep, and he told me I was his world. He said no one had ever understood him the way that I did, and that constant attention felt like warmth I didn't know I'd been missing. Now I know it was love bombing, the flood that sweeps you off your feet and quietly carries you away from the shore. At first, it all feels like devotion. Then, it becomes obligation. If I didn't respond fast enough, his tone changed. If I went out without him, the questions started. Where were you? Who was there? Why didn't you answer? Each apology I gave bought me a few hours of peace. And that is how control works. It trains you to manage someone else's emotions instead of your own. When he tried to tell me that my friends didn't like him, I defended him. When he said my family was trying to control me, I believed him. He painted them all as villains and himself as my savior, because he was the only one who understood me. I didn't even need counseling anymore. Now that is isolation, but it doesn't look like a cage. It looks like loyalty. I stopped seeing people who questioned him. He said, "It's us against the world." And for a while, I liked that. Until us became just him and the world became everyone else. 3 to 4 months in, we were engaged. He said he couldn't wait to build a life together, and I mistook urgency for passion. My parents tried to be supportive. They offered us work and helped where they could, but every gesture turned into a fight. He said that they disrespected him, and he said that my dad was controlling. And slowly, I started seeing them through his anger instead of my memories. That's how gaslighting feels, like losing your own reflection. You start doubting what you know and apologizing for what you never did and calling it love. After months of hearing how horrible and controlling my parents were, I started to believe it. He told me they didn't want me to be happy and that they only cared about keeping me under their rules. Every disagreement I'd ever had with them, he replayed until it sounded like proof. And when I began to pull away, he smiled and said, "See, they only love you when you obey." So when he asked me to move in, it didn't feel reckless. It felt like freedom, like finally escaping people who supposedly never understood me. That's what psychological isolation looks like, convincing you that everyone who might save you is the enemy. I packed my things and told myself I was starting a new life and crossed the line from independence into control without even seeing it. He still lived with his parents, but I told myself love was about sacrifice. I sold nearly everything just for us to get by. Furniture, clothes, even keepsakes. Our pantry was constantly empty, and we lived off food pantries and borrowed groceries. That was financial abuse, although he had no problem having money for his cigarettes and alcohol. I didn't have the understanding of what financial abuse was at that time. He controlled the money, and the money gained permission. Permission to eat, permission to drive, and permission to exist. The yelling started small, irritation that I'd folded something wrong or dinner wasn't ready. Then came the slammed doors, the silent treatment, the nights I slept facing the wall because I didn't know which version of him would wake up beside me. That's intimidation. Violence implied so that you don't have to be hit to be afraid. We married fast. A handful of people showed up. I smiled for pictures, pretending the empty chairs didn't sting. Months later, I had learned that he told my family to stay away, and that if they showed, that there would be consequences. He cut me off from the people who loved me most and called it protection. I remember thinking, if I just love him harder, he'll calm down. I can fix him. That's the lie every survivor tells themselves right before they start disappearing. A few months later, I stood in the bathroom staring at a pregnancy test. My hands could not stop shaking. I wanted to be happy, but fear overwhelmed me. I called my mom in secret, and she told me, "We'll help you, sweetheart, whatever you need." Even after everything, she was still there. He didn't want them involved. He said they'd stress me out. He said he'd take care of everything, but everything meant control. Where I went, who I talked to, what I ate. He even decided when I could sleep. That's how coercive control works. It invades every corner of your life until the only safe thought is silence. My parents found ways to help behind the scenes, dropping off food, buying us some used furniture. Each act of kindness felt like rebellion, and each time I thanked them in whispers, I realized how small my world had become. When our daughter was born, I thought maybe he'd soften. Sometimes abusers do, for a moment. But once the attention shifted from him to the baby, his temper grew. The arguments came faster, louder, and closer. One night, during another argument, I was pinned against the wall. His face inches from mine, his voice shaking with rage, and when his fist hit the wall beside my head, something inside me broke, and something else woke up. That was the moment I understood this wasn't a bad marriage. It was violence. And if I didn't leave, my daughter would grow up thinking that fear was love. The next morning when he went to work, I called my parents. They didn't ask any questions. They just said, "We're on our way." They arrived with a van, and I had packed the essentials, baby clothes, any documents I needed, and a few things that felt like mine. When the door closed behind us, the air felt heavy and clean at the same time. That wasn't leaving a husband. That was escaping a captor. I thought that was the end, but it was only the beginning. When I shut that door behind me, I thought it was over, but leaving is never the end. It's just the beginning of a different kind of survival. I moved back in with my parents. The same people I'd once believed were controlling were now the ones holding me up. They didn't lecture. They didn't say, "I told you so." They just made space for me, for my baby, and all the pieces of life I'd barely escaped. At first, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my house made my body tense. I'd jolt awakening thinking he was there in the driveway, at the door, or coming to take her away. That's what trauma does. Even when you're safe, your body doesn't believe it yet. I spent days filling out custody papers, answering phone calls from lawyers, trying to explain to strangers what it feels like to be invisible. I told them about the control, the fear, the wall, but the legal system don't speak the language of bruises you can't see. The first time I sat in courtroom, he looked calm. Polite even. Abusers are good at that. They charm the room while you shake in your seat. I learned that silence looks like guilt and anger looks like instability, even when both come from pain. Those years became cycle of court dates and survival between family courts, support court, Supreme Court, and even New York State Appellate Court. Every letter in the mail made my stomach turn. Each hearing opened wounds I just managed to close, but I kept showing up because my daughter needed me. With our first court date in Supreme Court, the hostility from him and his family had poisoned every corner of the small town we lived in. Lies, rumors, and defamation. It felt endless. When the judge granted us a rare relocation order, permission to move with my parents several hours away, it was the first time I felt the word freedom in my chest. We packed everything into boxes, baby toys, court papers, fragments of peace. The highway stretched ahead of us like a new lifeline. I remember watching the rearview mirror disappear and whispering, "We're going to be okay, baby." I just wanted to believe it. Distance helped, but freedom isn't measured in miles. It's measured in quiet, and quiet takes time. Even with the new walls, new neighbors, the fear stayed. He still found ways to reach through calls, messages, threats disguised as co-parenting, literally moving and following us to each location we moved. Sometimes it wasn't him at all. It was just the echo of him in my own head. And that is what post-traumatic control feels like. Living with a ghost of a man who isn't there but still rules the room. I'd wake in the night to check doors, replay old arguments, wonder if he'd ever change. Part of me hoped he would, not for me, but for the little girl who still had to know him and go visit. That's another layer of abuse people rarely talk about. How co-parenting with a narcissist keeps you tethered to your past, even when all you want is peace. Every decision, doctor's visits, school forms, birthdays, become negotiation with a person who only knows how to weaponize control. He didn't need access to my life. He only needed access to my fear. 15 years. That's how long the courts, the filings, and the hearings have lasted. 15 years of proving what I'd already survived. But while he fought to keep control, I fought to be rebuilt. I found work, steady work, and began supporting myself. Each paycheck felt like a piece of my freedom coming back. I learned how to manage money again, how to make choices without asking permission. That was my rebellion. I built a career from the ground up. I learned leadership, organization, independence, all the things I'd been told I couldn't do. I built stability for my daughter so she would never doubt what safety feels like. There were still nights that fear crept in, when the sound of shouting on TV made me flinch, or someone yelled at me for the day at work. That's PTSD, the leftover wiring of survival. It doesn't disappear, it dulls over time, like thunder moving further away. But I refused to let fear raise my child. I made home a place where peace was the loudest thing we heard. I used to think abuse was about anger, but now I know it's about power. Taking away someone's sense of choice and calling it love. Love bombing isn't romance, it's recruitment. Gaslighting wasn't confusion, it's strategy. Isolation wasn't protection, it's imprisonment. He didn't just want a partner, he wanted control. And the scariest part, I almost gave it to him willingly, because he convinced me that surrender was affection. But the moment I left, I started rewriting that story. Healing came slowly. It came in therapy sessions, in nights of ugly crying, in mornings when I forced myself to eat breakfast, even when anxiety killed my appetite. It came in forgiveness, not for him, but for me. For the girl who didn't know any better. For the woman who finally did. I started saying words I hadn't used in years. Safe, peaceful, enough. And eventually, they started to feel true. My daughter grew. She saw two very different households. She saw love that lifts and that traps. She learned to tell the difference. That's the legacy I wanted for her. Not perfect, but honest. She knows I will always be her safe space, and I know that she is the one reason I'm still alive. I still carry the scars, emotional ones mostly. I still flinch when someone yells. I still overthink, overprepare, and overapologize. But I also run organizations, lead teams, and advocate for others. I've turned survival into strength. I've built an empire not out of revenge, but out of resilience. There's a saying, you can't change what happened, but you can change what it means. And that is what I've done. I can't erase those years, but I can let them fuel my purpose, to speak the truth out loud so someone else doesn't have to learn it the hard way. Mind you, I was only in this relationship for a year, and it has still taken me 17 years to rebuild myself. I can't even imagine the amount of pain that people go through in marriages that go on longer or relationships that go on longer, but there is always, always hope, and you deserve more. If you're listening to this and you see yourself in my story, please understand you're not weak for staying. You're strong for surviving. You did what you had to do to stay alive, to protect your child, and to make it to this moment. Leaving isn't one decision. It's 100 small ones that finally add up to freedom. And healing isn't instant. It's the slow rebuilding of a self that someone tried to erase. If you're still in it or just getting out, you're not alone. You can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. Visit thehotline.org or text 988 and press 1 for crisis support. There are people who will believe you, people who will help you. You deserve peace. You deserve a love that doesn't hurt. And one day, I promise, you'll breathe again without looking over your shoulder. This has been When the Mask Falls, episode 17, The Bruises You Can't See. Share it if it might reach someone who needs to know. What they're living through has a name, and it's not their fault. Until next time, take care of yourself, and if you need to reach out, please do. Someone is waiting to listen.